"They're here." The manager's voice was filled with panic and urgency as she gasped the words out. The cashier's expression shifted instantly from exhausted indifference to sheer terror. Another employee, who had been waiting idly behind the counter, quickly stood up and disappeared into the back of the store. It was just after 9:30 at night. My day had been long and exhausting. I had struggled through a test and several quizzes in different classes, and after that, I pushed myself through a tough gym session. When I finally got back to my apartment, I realized I was out of milk. The convenience store beneath my building was still open, so I figured I had time to grab what I needed and maybe check out some snacks before they closed at 10. After browsing for a bit and finding nothing else I wanted, I took my milk to the counter. I was the only customer inside. The only other people present were the 3 employees. Who were they? A cleaning crew? Maintenance workers? But the store wasn't closed yet. As I picked up my milk and headed for the door, the manager suddenly stepped in front of me. "We can't let you leave right now. It's not safe. You'll have to wait with us until they pass." I frowned, confused and irritated. Who are they? Why was she stopping me from leaving? The store was about to close. Shouldn't they want me out of there? The manager hesitated, exhaling sharply like she was too overwhelmed to explain. Instead of answering, she turned and started pulling down the metal blinds, securing the storefront. This wasn't normal. It wasn't time to close yet. I wasn't about to stick around for whatever weird game they were playing. I took a few steps toward the door, but froze before stepping outside. Standing on the other side of the glass was a man. He wore an elegant yet outdated suit, the kind someone from the 1920s might have worn. His tall top hat added to his eerie presence, as if he had stepped out of another time entirely. Before I could process what I was looking at, a sharp, blood-curdling scream echoed behind me. I spun around to see the cashier, hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The manager rushed back to the front of the store. The moment her eyes landed on me near the door, and then on the man outside, her voice rang out with a firm, urgent command. "Get away from the door. Now." I obeyed immediately, backing away toward her. But before I could ask anything, she spoke again, this time with even more force. "Go hide behind an aisle. Don't come out until I say so. If you don't listen to me, you're going to die tonight. Now go." I felt a mix of emotions, but something inside me said it was best to listen to her. Still, I couldn't understand why my life, or anyone else's, would be in danger. Maybe this man was a regular troublemaker, someone who harassed the employees. Either way, I decided not to argue. I placed the milk back on the counter and moved to hide between the aisles in the corner of the store. I stood there for a moment, feeling awkward and uneasy, my curiosity mixed with fear. I pulled out my phone, but it wouldn't turn on. That was strange. I was sure it had battery when I left my apartment. Just my luck. Now, all I could do was wait. I could hear the manager whispering to the cashier, who sounded terrified. Then, about 2 minutes later, The automatic doors slid open. Footsteps echoed as someone entered and walked toward the counter. Silence filled the store again, but only for a few seconds. Then, a deep and polite voice broke through. "Good evening." "Hello," the cashier stammered, barely getting the words out. "Would you be so kind as to point me in the direction of your store's meats?" Curiosity got the better of me. I carefully peeked from the edge of the aisle. The man from outside was now at the counter. He stood perfectly straight, his posture almost unnatural. He was taller than I expected, easily 6'5" or more. With his tall top hat, he loomed over the small cashier. The cashier nervously gestured. We have some lunch meats. Turkey ham. They're over there in that section, you see." The man cut her off. "Oh, I am sorry, dear. I don't believe we are speaking about the same thing. I was told there would be a fair stock of freshly harvested meats available for purchase." The cashier's face went pale. I don't know what you mean, sir." The man didn't move. "Oh, I think you do." He stood completely still, his piercing gaze locked onto the trembling cashier. She lowered her head, her breathing uneven. It was as if he were a character in a game, frozen until someone gave him a command. His presence was unnerving. Then the manager appeared from the back of the store, keeping a safe distance. In a calm voice, she spoke. "How can we help you, sir?" The man slowly turned. He was strikingly handsome, with smooth skin, no signs of exhaustion, and unnaturally perfect teeth that gleamed under the store's lights. His eerie smile stayed fixed as he met the manager's eyes. "Good evening. I was told there would be a fair stock of freshly harvested meat available for purchase." His tone was just as polite as before. The manager took a deep breath and responded, holding his gaze. "Sir, unfortunately, we have run out of fresh meat. If you return another time, we will have a new shipment. But right now, we don't have any available. Thank you for shopping with us." The man's smile slowly faded. He stared at her in complete silence for what felt like an eternity. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there, frozen like a statue. Then, as if waking from a trance, his expression softened, and the unsettling smile returned. "I understand. I will return. I wish you all a lovely evening." With those words, he calmly stepped out through the automatic doors and disappeared into the night. The cashier behind the counter broke down in uncontrollable sobs. The manager quickly moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her and guiding her toward the back of the store. I followed behind them. She led us to a small storage room in the far corner, where she opened a door to what seemed like a janitor's closet. Inside, I saw the third employee, the one who had left earlier, sitting on the floor, holding a cordless phone. "Did you get through to them?" the manager asked, gently helping the terrified cashier to sit on the floor. "They're trying to figure out how to get here. It might take some time. Can you hold things down on your own?" he replied. The manager sighed, nodded, and then turned to me. Her expression was serious, her voice firm. We're stuck here for a while. I need one employee to stay on the phone, and the other isn't in any condition to help. That leaves you. Listen carefully. If you don't follow my instructions exactly, we all die. You don't have a choice. Do you understand? I swallowed hard and nodded. Yeah, I understand. But the truth was, I didn't. None of this made sense. Who were they? Was she talking about the man in the suit, or whoever was on the other end of that phone call? My head was spinning, and a part of me still felt like this was some elaborate prank. The manager moved back behind the counter near the first register. For a brief moment, I considered running. I could make a break for the door, get back to my apartment, and pretend none of this ever happened. But before I could even think through an escape plan, the automatic doors slid open again. This time, the sound of quick, frantic footsteps filled the store. I glanced at the manager, and she waved her hand, mouthing the word "hide" before ducking under the counter. I hurried back to my hiding spot behind the aisles, my heart pounding. Then, a new sound joined the footsteps, heavy, raspy breathing, like that of someone struggling for air. It was uneven, strained, almost sickly. The footsteps didn't follow a normal pattern. They rushed toward the counter, stopped for a moment, then started moving again, this time erratic, growing closer, and then suddenly distant, like something was darting between the shelves. That's when it hit me. Whatever it was checking the aisles, one by one, and soon it would reach mine. I froze, my mind racing for a solution. Maybe if I moved to another aisle while it was distracted, I could stay hidden. I waited until it passed the one before mine, then quietly shifted to the side, hoping it wouldn't notice. Peeking around the corner, I finally saw it. It wasn't human. The thing stood about 4 or 5 feet tall, its body completely bare, its skin unnaturally pale, so white it looked lifeless. Its back was horribly hunched, with its spine jutting out so much that it seemed like it might rip through the skin at any moment. Its legs were thin and frail, looking far too weak to support its body. Its feet had long, clawed toes, resembling those of a lizard. As it turned the corner, I got a clearer view of its short arms, which ended in disturbingly large, human-like hands with dirty, blackened nails that were far too long. Its chest was stretched tight over an oversized rib cage, and the rest of its torso was so thin it looked like its skin was clinging directly to the bones, as if it hadn't eaten in years. The worst part was its face. Its jaw was unnaturally long and ended in a sharp, almost comical point. Its mouth hung open, exposing perfectly aligned but unnervingly long teeth. They were pristine, as if they had never decayed, yet their unnatural length made them terrifying. Its gums, in contrast, were black and rotting. The nose and eyes had a human shape, but the whites of its eyes were sickly green, as if they had been poisoned or diseased. Thin strands of wiry white hair sprouted sparsely from its head, making it look even more unnatural. I crept to the next aisle, trying to be as quiet as possible. Once the creature finished its search, it turned and walked toward the exit, its labored breathing echoing through the store. It finally stepped through the automatic doors, but just as they closed, they opened again. The manager's voice cut through the tense silence, calling for me to come to the front. I hesitated, but slowly moved forward, keeping my eyes locked on the entrance, bracing for whoever or whatever was coming next. The doors remained open, yet no one entered. "Get behind the counter. Don't say a word. When they smile, you smile back," the manager whispered. Confused, I started to ask, "Smile when who?" But she silenced me. A child ran inside. I blinked in surprise. A child? Alone? At this hour? In this part of the city? Before I could process it, 6 more followed, all around 5 or 6 years old. They scattered, giggling as they ran between aisles, playing some kind of game like tag or hide and seek. Their laughter echoed through the store, eerily contrasting the tension from moments ago. "Let them play," the manager muttered. "Just remember what I said. When they smile, smile back." After a few minutes, their game abruptly stopped. They moved to the front in perfect unison, forming a straight line. Each one grabbed a chocolate bar from the counter display and stepped up to pay. The first child placed $1 and some coins on the counter, exactly the right amount for the candy. Then he turned and stared at me, expressionless. At first, it seemed like the typical way kids sometimes stare at strangers for no reason. But these weren't normal kids. He smiled. It started small, but then his mouth stretched unnaturally wide, far too wide, reaching from one side of his face to the other. A long row of jagged teeth lined the inside, sharp and gleaming. My forced smile faltered, but before I could react, the manager's voice came low and firm. "Smile. Back." I swallowed my fear and obeyed, my lips trembling as I mirrored the grotesque grin. The child giggled, then turned, grabbed his candy bar, and ran out of the store. One by one, the other children did the same. Each walked up, stared, smiled their horrifying, unnatural smiles, and waited for me to do the same. It felt like I was part of some twisted ritual, forced to endure their disturbing grins. Finally, the last one finished, and I started to step away from the counter, relieved that it was over. But before I could move, the manager grabbed my arm, stopping me in place. "There's still one here. We don't move until it's gone." I nodded and listened. Faint footsteps echoed from the back aisles. This one wasn't like the others. It was still playing. "I'm going to find you," it sang in a high-pitched, teasing voice. A few minutes passed before it stopped in front of the janitor's closet. It tilted its head, as if sensing something. Then, with a small hand, it gripped the handle and pulled. The cashier, who had been hiding inside, tried desperately to keep the door shut, but she wasn't strong enough. With an unnatural strength, the child let out an ear-piercing scream and yanked the door off its hinges, sending the cashier sprawling onto the floor. The child's gaze darted between her and the employee inside. Then, in a playful, sing-song voice, it said, "I'm going to tell on you," before dashing out of the store, laughing hysterically. Unlike the others, this one didn't take any candy. It didn't need to. The cashier lay motionless, unconscious from the impacts. The other employee cautiously peeked out from the now doorless closet, his face pale with fear. He turned to the manager, his voice tense. "What now? We don't even know which one of the kids will wake up. It could be any of them. And our friends still aren't here. I think we should just run for it." "No, no way," the manager shot back. "You know that won't end well for us. We have to stay put until it's over, or until the team arrives. Take the phone and hide behind the aisles. We need to stay connected. If we don't, shit. Hide. Now." The manager ducked under the counter in an instant. I grabbed the phone and ran to the back corner of the store with the other employee. The automatic doors slid open again, and as I glanced back, I realized we had left someone behind. The cashier was still lying there, unconscious. I took a step toward her, but the employee beside me grabbed my arm, shaking his head. "Don't. It's too late." My stomach sank, but I knew he was right. My legs felt weak as I crouched down. Silence filled the store, thick and heavy. Then, the sound of hooves clicking against the floor echoed through the space. A deep, twisted laugh followed. The voice was adult, male, most likely. Whatever was moving had weight, its steps slow but deliberate. It was on the other side of the aisles, just beyond where the cashier lay. We crept forward, just enough to catch a glimpse. From behind the opposite aisle, legs like a deer's emerged, but the upper body belonged to something else entirely, a man, or something pretending to be one. It wore a clown outfit, red and blue, with a jester's hat to match. It stood at least 6 feet tall, but its broad shoulders stretched the fabric unnaturally. Its hands were black, fingers ending in long, jagged nails. The pale, painted face gleamed under the store lights, black makeup surrounding its eyes and lips. A red clown nose sat at the center of its face. It stopped walking and laughing when it reached the cashier. Then, in one swift motion, it bent down and lifted her by the neck. Tilting its head, it stared at her like she was some rare discovery, though it was the true horror in the room. My coworker whispered a description into the phone, his voice hurried and urgent. Someone was on the other end, but their words were too quiet to make out. Then, the cashier's eyes snapped open. At first, she was confused. Then, terror flooded her face as she took in what was holding her. She let out a piercing scream. The clown flinched at the sound, then yanked her closer, sinking its teeth into her throat. Her scream cut off instantly. It took another bite, then reached up, grasped her head with both hands, and, with a horrifying snap, ripped it clean off. Blood sprayed like a broken sprinkler, splattering the aisles. The head landed just feet away from us. I didn't dare move, but it didn't matter. Another burst of manic laughter erupted from the clown. Then, In a disturbingly high-pitched voice, it said, "I know you're over there. Want to see a trick?" The employee next to me panicked, dropping the phone and bolting toward the front. He only made it a few steps before the clown was suddenly in front of him. The speed was unreal. The employee crashed into the monster, but barely made it stumble. The clown grabbed him by both wrists, lifted him effortlessly, then, without hesitation, ripped both arms from his body. The screams were unbearable. Blood gushed onto the floor as he writhed in agony. The clown let out another laugh before kicking him in the skull with its hoof. The sickening crunch echoed through the store. Silence followed. I looked at the phone still lying on the ground. A voice crackled from the speaker. With shaking hands, I picked it up. "Hello?" I whispered, my throat dry with fear. "Listen," the voice on the other end said urgently. "You need to blind it. Check your phone. I know it wasn't working before, but it will now. Turn on the flashlight and aim for its eyes. Do you hear me?" I pulled out my phone. Somehow, it was on. Not only that, it was fully charged. That didn't make any sense. The clown's voice interrupted my thoughts, calling out from the center of the store. "Don't think I forgot about you. I've got a different trick for you. You're going to love it." I dropped the store phone and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran. But in my panic, my phone slipped from my pocket and hit the floor. I scrambled to grab it, fumbling to turn the flashlight on. Hoofbeats thundered behind me. Before I could react, I was grabbed and spun around. But just in time, my thumb hit the flashlight button. A beam of light shot into the clown's face. It screeched in pain and stumbled backward, clutching its eyes. Furious, it lashed out, knocking shelves over, sending merchandise flying. It thrashed blindly, trying to reach me, but I kept the light steady. The clown tripped over a broken shelf and fell flat on its face. It scrambled to its feet, lunged at me, but the moment the light hit its eyes again, it howled and bolted for the exit. And just like that, it was gone. The store was quiet again. From behind the counter, the manager slowly stood, her face pale as she took in the carnage. She didn't speak, just stared at what was left of her coworkers. Something inside her had broken. I could see it in her eyes. But instead of saying anything, she turned to me. "Where's the phone?" I switched off my flashlight and slipped my phone back into my pocket. Stepping over the mess of blood and broken shelves, I retrieved the store phone and handed it to her. She didn't move at first, still frozen in disbelief. Then, with a shaky breath, she took it and pressed it to her ear. I stood there, unable to look back at the bodies. I didn't want to see them again. The voice on the other end of the line spoke. The manager exhaled in relief. "Oh, thank God," she muttered. "How long?" The person on the other end kept talking. Okay, she said, barely holding herself together. "I can do that. Here's the rewritten version of your content, while keeping the same meaning. There's still one other alive. I'll have him keep an eye out for your arrival." The manager placed the phone down and looked at me with exhausted eyes. Stand by the door and watch for black SUVs. When they arrive, yell for me, and it'll let you know if they're the ones we're waiting for. If they're not, hide. I have something to take care of in the back." She picked up the phone again and disappeared into the back of the store. I didn't bother asking any more questions. Whoever this team was, they had to be our way out of this nightmare. I moved toward the automatic doors and stared outside. Everything looked the same as always, just an empty street. As I waited, I could hear the manager working on something in the back. My mind started racing, trying to make sense of everything I had been through. It was overwhelming. Thoughts and emotions crashed into each other. But one thing stood out. I needed to understand what was happening. Minutes passed as I considered every possibility. Nothing made sense. No explanation seemed to fit. Just as frustration set in, the black SUVs finally arrived. The doors swung open, and men in tactical gear and suits stepped out. There were at least 4 or 5 vehicles, and each had about 6 men inside. I turned toward the back of the store and shouted, "Hey, is this them?" "They're here." Silence. "Hey," I yelled again, walking toward the back. At the end of the last aisle, I saw the phone lying on the ground. Confused, I knelt to pick it up, but before I could, I heard voices on the other end. "We're here. Do you copy? Hello? Our team is entering now. Are you still with us?" The urgency in their voices made me hesitate. Instead of picking up the phone, I stood and turned the corner. The sight stopped me cold. The manager lay on the floor, her face staring blankly at the ceiling, her body surrounded by a pool of blood. Her stomach was slit open, her insides spilling out. Kneeling over her was a man, one I recognized. The first man who had walked in earlier. He still wore his fancy old suit, but now without the hat and coat. He held a knife, carving into her body. Organs were scattered around them. He had ripped them out. He looked up at me and smiled before returning to his work. In a calm voice, he spoke. "I told you it'd be back for the meat. I don't mind doing the job myself." With that, he reached into her open stomach, pulled out her heart, and examined it like a prized possession. Then he placed it into a suitcase beside him and snapped it shut. Standing up, he met my gaze, then glanced at his knife. "I bet you'd make for some fine cuts too," he said, his smile widening. With a deep grunt, he lunged at me. I didn't think. I just ran. Rushing back toward the front, I turned the corner, but then he suddenly stopped. He had spotted the men coming in from outside. His expression changed. "Well, aren't you the lucky one tonight?" he muttered. He calmly slid the knife back into a sheath on his vest, then walked to the last aisle. When he returned, he carried the suitcase in one hand and the manager's lifeless body over his shoulder as if she weighed nothing. Without hesitation, he walked toward the janitor's closet, the same one I had seen ripped apart earlier. But now, the door was back in place, as if nothing had ever happened. He opened it, and a blast of freezing air rushed out. From my angle, I caught a glimpse of something hanging inside, a body hooked like meat in a freezer. The man stepped in, tossed the manager's body inside, and grabbed the doorknob. Before shutting it, he turned to me one last time, his voice light and casual. "Good day." The automatic doors slid open behind me, and a swarm of men rushed in. A half dozen of them immediately pointed their weapons at the closet door. One of them yanked it open, only to find an empty space. "Shit!" one of them cursed, kicking a loaf of bread off the shelf. "We've been chasing this bastard for months. How does he always slip away?" Another man muttered in frustration. The rest of the team moved through the store, scanning every corner. Some carried strange equipment, though there was too much happening for me to keep track of it all. I did notice a few things. Some collected strands of hair from the floor. Others used a black light to trace the footprints left by that hunched-back creature. They even gathered the loose change and $1 bills the kids had used to pay. After a while, 2 large boxes were brought in, and they carefully placed the bodies of the other workers inside. Strangely, no one seemed concerned about me. A few minutes later, a man in a suit walked up to me. He wasn't interested in asking questions. He just wanted to say something. His voice was calm but firm. "I know this is overwhelming, and I know it doesn't make sense. No explanation will ever make it any clearer. I'm sorry for what you saw tonight, but there's nothing we can do to change it. These things are doing this all over the world, and we still don't understand why. This store has been targeted 7 times already. We're doing everything we can. We're one of the few trying to stop them." He took a deep breath and looked at me with something close to pity. "We need you to stay silent. If people find out about us, we'll be shut down, and no one will be left to fight them. More people will die. Things will only get worse. If you care about stopping this, keep your mouth shut." He pointed to the entrance. "You can leave whenever you're ready." I had no idea what he really meant, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to stay silent. People deserved to know what happened here. The truth needed to be told, but I kept my thoughts to myself. Without a word, I stepped through the automatic doors and out onto the street. The vehicles that had filled the area were gone. The store behind me was still lit up, but now it was empty. I turned to the street. Life had gone back to normal. People were walking around as if nothing had ever happened. In the distance, I heard the metro train approaching. It was over.